We got a nice balance of action this college football weekend, and we start the TV guide with a nice Thursday, Friday splattering, I should say, which is probably going to be complete by the time that this podcast goes up. But Thursday night, we do have Old Dominion hosting Georgia Southern. The Southern Eagles are 5-2, 3-0 in the Sun Belt right now. That'll be on ESPN2. They're only 1-point favorite at Old Dominion. Some of these teams in the Sun Belt pretty close overall in talent level. Old Dominion been playing a little bit better as of late there. But JC French there of Georgia Southern leading the pack there for the Eagles. And finally at 7:30 on ESPN proper, Syracuse at 5-2 will be playing on the road at Pitt, the undefeated Pitt Panthers there. Last win over California. Best win maybe on the road at Cincinnati, second week of the season at this point. A team that's been playing pretty well. Probably not making it to the ACC championship, quite frankly, but two teams that are looking pretty good record-wise at least. Syracuse has some not great wins as it is. 5-1 there, of course, really relying on McCord to get some wins there. Sean Tucker, of course, the running back they were leaning on last season, onto the New York Giants, splitting carries back there. They had a win over NC State last time out. Nice win over UNLV and Georgia Tech to win earlier in the season, but we see how a couple of those teams have turned out. UNLV looking like the best one, and that was a 44-41 bloodbath. So we'll see if Pittsburgh will get some points on the board here. The over-under at this one, 62.5, with Pitt 5.5-point favorites at home. This should be a shootout on Thursday night. Friday, we have an interesting triple header led by Boston College hosting Louisville, a couple of 4-3 teams in the ACC. The Cards favored by 7.5 on the road here. They've been looking like the much better team. Tyler Shaw, of course, over $2,000 on the season, 18-3 touchdown to interception ratio. They just look like the better football team. This is the ESPN2 game right now, losing by touchdown to Miami, of course, and they've lost 3-4 at this point, but Notre Dame and SMU were the other two losses in that stretch. Wins over Georgia Tech and Virginia. All things considered, a more difficult stretch for a more, mediocre team like this squad, the Cardinals. Lacey did opt out, the wide receiver, for, I think, the remainder of the season. So they're losing a receiver there. And they have some tougher games down the stretch. At Clemson, Pittsburgh still on the schedule yet. At Kentucky to finish up the season. So it could get a little bumpy still for the Cardinals. And Boston College, of course, coming down to earth a little bit here after a nice 4-1 start. Losses to Virginia and Virginia Tech on the road. Now coming back home here for this one. Boise State at UNLV at 10:30 on the CBS Sports Network. Boise State only 3.5-point favorites at home. On the road at this one in Las Vegas. UNLV looking pretty swell. Both of these teams 2-0 in Mountain West Conference play so far. Maddox Mason is, I was thinking Mason Maddox, but it's the other way around. Maddox Mason for Boise State has been a pretty good quarterback this season. Of course, we know Gente is where the ball's going. 17 touchdowns, over 1,200 yards on 126 carries so far this season. He's must-watch TV. Can he continue to build a Heisman case? And UNLV, of course, has had a decent schedule. You would think preseason, at least, for a Mountain West team. They played at Houston, at Kansas, home against Syracuse, and then, of course, they've got that Oregon State team that they played already on the road. They do have Washington. So they don't have Washington State on the schedule. The only loss was that Syracuse game and that shootout, as just mentioned. A lot of high-scoring games recently, but wins over Utah State and Oregon State at home. So some points will be expected in this one as well. 64.5-point over-under. And we'll get some interesting quarterback play from UNLV here as well. Of course, we saw a couple guys opt out, but we will have Haji Malik Williams, who's completing 70% of his passes, 10-2 touchdown to interception ratio. He's currently the team's leading rusher as well, a bit of a dual threat there. They're a good defensive team, and excited to see this one on Friday night. They're averaging almost 44 points per game. So this will be a very interesting ball clip here as they try to stack the box against Boise State, much like Hawaii did. And the late night games at 11 on Fox. 3-4 USC will be hosting 4-3 Rutgers. Both of these teams, I believe, have lost, what if they combined lost like their last 7 games? So that's not looking so swell there. Last 6 games combined, 3 each. But still, USC trying to hang on there. Miller Moss still a quality quarterback there. Just having a lot of struggles for that squad, and the Rutgers just come down to earth a bit. USC's 13.5 points at home. I think that's more because Rutgers is, of course, flying across the country. Of course, that's a talking point that's been beaten to the ground at this point. The running back here, Kyle Mananiga, 5'9" kid, 845 yards rushing, 10 touchdowns, 5.5 per carry behind that good offensive line for Rutgers. Could be a key factor here against the USC Trojans as they hand it off to him in the backfield. Now our noon slate is going to be a little light again, as to be expected. We have 9 games on the register, and our pretty good football games are divided up throughout the slate on Saturday, thankfully. The top watch I have, number 24 Navy hosting number 12 Notre Dame. Now you do have to question how effective Navy has been, at least defensively. Are they just keeping the ball away from opponents with that offense, churning, scoring? That can make a big defense. And when you play a team like Notre Dame, are you able to really execute when you play just a higher level defense? Look at the defenses they played so far: Bucknell, Temple, Memphis, UAB, Air Force, Charlotte. I mean, these are dumpster fires. And to play Notre Dame here, this could be a real problem for Navy. They're almost 2 touchdown underdogs on the road. 51.5 points expected to sit around that number with the under-over. Harvaluth, the quarterback for Navy, 10 touchdowns on the ground on the year so far. And Hajduk, I can't say any of these names, you know that, has 5 touchdowns receiving, as his team does like to throw it around just a touch more than you'd expect. Notre Dame, of course, looked a little rough there earlier in the season. They knocked off Texas A&M, then promptly lost to Northern Illinois. They played a Miami of Ohio team, 28-3, but still closer than you would have thought. They thumped Stanford and Georgia Tech the past couple weeks. They're kind of chilling at home recently, and now playing this Navy squad, and will be heavily favored in this one. They're coming off a bye week as well. Riley Leonard looking a little better, completing almost 67% of his passes. Again, he's getting things done on the ground. We're expected to see handed off a whole lot, and we'll see if this Navy defense can hold up at all against the Notre Dame defense, one of the better squads in the country. Now, channel flipper games, we have some options here. We do have Nebraska heading to Ohio State. Looks a lot less promising since they got thumped at Indiana. Another road game here, red-on-red action. Ohio State has a stake for one of the top handful of teams in the country. It's a 25.5 point line here. So Raiola, or Ravioli, as we say, heading on the road here, and we'll have a chance at Ohio State on the road. Not high hopes for this, and we'll see if Nebraska can stay inside the line after a tough game last week. The Indiana squad then is home again, playing Washington. Ohio State game is going to be on Fox. Yeah, Washington's going to be on the Big Ten Network. 6.5 is lined for Indiana at home. 54.5 point over under. Again, this game hasn't been talked about a whole lot because Washington, not a lot is expected from this squad, especially traveling across the country. 3 losses already, which is too bad. 2-2 in the Big Ten, but I think they're still capable of doing some damage. The loss to Iowa 40-16 last week was rough. Lost at Rutgers, lost to Washington State. Just not looking so good. 7th, tied for 7th, I believe, in the Big Ten here. Just very difficult for Washington to bounce back from that. Will Rogers was not as effective last week, less than 100 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick, and Cade McNamara threw for a couple touchdowns on them, and Caleb Johnson ran for a couple as well, and almost 8 yards per carry on them. Indiana could do something similar. We'll probably see the ball handed off quite a bit. Chris Rourke, who hurt his thumb last week and was replaced by Tavarin Jackson, he could play in this one. We may see no Rourke, who's completing almost 75% of his passes for 10 yards a tote, 15-3 touchdown to interception ratio. Pocket's been pretty clean, but we may see handoffs here to Justin Ellison, who's averaging 7 yards per carry, and Tyson Lawson, who's averaging 5.2 yards per carry. So it could be very dangerous still for Washington here. I do have, we bumped Oklahoma out of here for sure. North Texas hosting Tulane in the American Conference. Of course, North Texas played a good one. Chandler Morris threw for a bundle last week in the Memphis game, had a shot late, had the ball batted down. Tulane favored by 8 in this one with 67.5 point over under. Another monster number in this one. A lot of yards expected, a lot of points. Chandler Morrison's got 2,400 yards. I believe that's one of the top passing numbers in the country. 23-8 touchdown to interception ratio. Whole lot of passing yards here for the North Texas Mean Green. As for Tulane, 5-2 at this particular moment. They've racked up wins over Rice, UAB, South Florida, Louisiana, and Southeast Louisiana. Nothing particularly impressive. Losses, of course, to Kansas State and at Oklahoma. I've not watched them a whole lot recently, so I'll have closer eyes on this one. Darian Mensah's looked a little better, 1,400 yards, 63% completion, 11 touchdowns, 2 picks. Still like to hand the ball off there to Mekhi Hughes, who has almost 800 yards on the year, 5.5 per carry, and 8 touchdowns to lead the offense there. And the defense is looking pretty decent as well, as the kids say these days. Tyler Grubbs at linebackers, 3 sacks on the season, and 22 sacks when you include the assists in there. Fumble forced, one of the leaders there on the defensive side for the Green Wave. As for notable games, of course, there's only 9 in this window, but I do have Ole Miss hosting Oklahoma. This is just going to be disgusting. Oklahoma just can't score. This is the ESPN game, but Oklahoma can't score. I don't know why you'd want to watch a whole lot of this. Mississippi's favored by 20 points with a 48.5 point over-under. Just gross. Just gross to me. Virginia Tech will be hosting Georgia Tech. A couple teams hoping to rebound. A couple teams I think are feisty. This is on the ACC network. Virginia Tech favored by 10.5. Haynes King's been banged up. Don't know for sure if he's expected back for this. Georgia Tech's 5-3 and 3-2 in the ACC. They're really making it late in the schedule here. Virginia Tech is 4-3 and 2-1 in the ACC. They should be, I think they're relatively healthy, if I'm not mistaken. Memphis hosting Charlotte then, and we'll see some points for the Memphis Tigers as they hope to stay in the thick of the American race, which has several teams at the top there with Army, Navy, Memphis, North Texas, I don't know, half the league, Tulane is all up there in the mix for the conference race. So that is the noon slate there. The afternoon has the beef of the action, 22 games on the slate, and we're leaving some of these games out. They just shouldn't be on the radar necessarily, aren't high priority at all. Starting with the 1245 SEC network, like Arkansas at Mississippi State. I'm mentioning it here, but not really on the watch guide. Arkansas is 4-3, playing at Mississippi State, who's 1-6. Now they've been playing better, but they're still a 1-win team. Arkansas with Taylon Green is still not playing super awesome. Now they can make a bowl game, but still this team not really on the watch guide. Notable, perhaps, but we'll check it on these teams if they look better in a couple of weeks here. The top watch in the afternoon, I have Texas at Vanderbilt, technically number 5 at number 25 per the AP poll. Texas coming off a huge game, of course, at Georgia, where they struggled. They lost at home. Now they have to rally here and play on the road, play the Commodores on the SEC network at 4:15, one of these weird start times. The line's about 18.5 at the 51.5 point over under in Nashville. You have to remember Pavia, has 1 touchdown and 1 turnover on the season passing through the air. They're also coming off a bye week. He's been pretty efficient running it on the ground as well. And this team can kind of move the ball a little bit on the ground. Not always been the most effective, but they're not a complete dumpster fire either. Defense has been so-so. Overall, the Commodores, last time out, were able to knock off a Ball State, although they struggled a bit in that game. Wins at Kentucky, of course. Alabama was where they put the stake in the ground. Virginia Tech to open the season was pretty good. They did lose at Georgia State, you have to remember, and at Missouri in double overtime. A couple of tough losses there. But this is still a team that you think might possibly hang with the Texas Longhorns. It's got to be the second best team at this particular point that Texas has played with all the way around. Now, as far as defenses, Michigan and Oklahoma were 2 of the best in the country, but Vanderbilt, it looks like it's not necessarily, not nearly there in terms of statistic-wise, but it seems like the Commodores might be able to hang for a little bit. Quentin Ewers has got to steady himself, get back up on his feet here. I just think this has a recipe for something to be interesting. Certainly have the Texas Longhorns winning, but I think it's a real indicator when they're coming off a bye and the Longhorns are not even 3-score favorites here on the road, and Vandy's had time to prep for this particular ball game here. The channel flippers I have here may turn into better watches than this ball game. Alabama will be hosting Missouri. Now, Brady Cook is hurt for this one. Will not be playing quarterback, which is greatly going to hurt the chances of this team going on the road and having a chance here. But, of course, the defense for Alabama has very much been problematic. This is the big-time ABC game. It's a 17-point spread right now for the Tide to just roll in this one. But we're going to have Drew Payne, presumably the former Notre Dame quarterback in this one, who looked good in relief of Brady Cook for a moment before he left, as he went to the hospital and came back to finish the game off last week. 2 top 25 teams again here, and this will be worth keeping an eye on until Alabama probably rolls away in this one. Oregon will be hosting Illinois. This was, let me see if it's still a 3-touchdown game. I think that line is way too big. Yes, Illinois has to go all the way across the country here to play the Ducks on CBS at 3:30, but it's moved. I got it at 21.5 now in Eugene. I think that's ridiculous for a 54.5-point game. Lots of defense expected. Dylan Gabriel now over 2,000 yards passing, in the hunt possibly for the Heisman, although further down on that list. Illinois is still a really good ball club. Of course, shutting down Michigan. Went to the wire there with Purdue in a weird game. Survived Nebraska by a touchdown. Also beat Kansas earlier in the season. Lost to Penn State 21-7 in a game that was decided in the final minute. Yes, it's been down to the wire in a lot of their games, but it certainly seems like the defense will be able to get after Dylan Gabriel back there. It certainly seems like he'll be able to cause more problems than Purdue, Michigan State, UCLA, Oregon State, Idaho, some of these other teams outside of Ohio State that this team has played. Yes, Oregon was able to, of course, win that game over Ohio State, and the Buckeyes were able to not exactly limit Oregon. That's not the best example, but I certainly think Illinois' defense will be able to get after the Ducks a little bit more than the Buckeyes, who didn't sack them a single time in that game, and we'll see a little bit different measuring stick here for the Ducks. Although flying across the country, as we know, has been problematic for a lot of the Big Ten teams. I just think that's an egregious line. But yet another game that's got a little bit bigger spread on it. Finally, BYU is up to 11th in the polls, still undefeated. They're over their win total already for the season. I think they're a couple games over their projected win total, depending on where you were looking. They're playing at UCF, where the wheels have kind of come off. This is a 3-4 team, 1-3 in the Big 12, but they're actually favored by a field goal here at home. And this team has lost 4 straight games, although they played close against Iowa State, Cincinnati, lost by 11 to Florida, and was thumped by Colorado. But surprisingly, this team, which can do some damage offensively, with Ja'Carri Brown, who I believe is still the starting quarterback in this particular game, is looking a little bit better perhaps than KJ Jefferson, and has been very efficient on the ground. 11 touchdowns for RJ Harvey and almost 900 yards at almost 6.7 yards per carry. On the season, the defense has not been very good. They're one of the bottom teams in the country as far as sacks and getting after the quarterback. But if they can limit some of the big plays by BYU, they will have a chance at an upset. This game is on ESPN. The other notable games in the afternoon window will be Iowa hosting Northwestern, which is not a particularly appetizing game, but the Wildcats have quietly kind of been in the mix of the Big Ten this season. Not a real exciting team to watch. They're now 1-3 in the Big Ten, but they've done a few things. And Iowa's 4-3. 14-point favorites are the Hawkeyes at this particular moment. You have Minnesota hosting Maryland. That's the Big Ten and the FS1 networks at 3:30 respectively. Minnesota's and Maryland are both 4-3 overall. Minnesota's favorite at home here. TCU will be hosting Texas Tech, which took a horrible loss. A couple horrible losses in the past couple weeks here, but is still 3-1 in conference play. And TCU favored at home here with a quarterback change recently that's seen a little bit better results. They did beat Utah 13-7 last week, although that's without Cam Rising, and a little bit different change up there at quarterback. And this team, not very great at offense, not very efficient on converting and picking up the necessary yards on third down, certainly, but was able to get it done against Utah. Nevertheless, I think that line's a little crazy, but that's a 3:30 game on Fox. James Madison, which is still looking like a good football team, will be hosting Southern Miss. That game is over on ESPN Plus at 3:30. And finally, Toledo, one of the favorites in the MAC, will be hosting, Bowling Green on ESPN Plus at 3:30 as well. Favored by less than a field goal. That number seems a little low as well. Moving on to the night slate. We have 14 games, and a couple of them really stand out. Wisconsin will be hosting Penn State, who's currently 3rd in the rankings. I believe they're actually ahead of Ohio State, depending on what polls you look at. That's a rarity. But they've had some problems against USC, UCLA. They did beat Illinois, but they haven't looked like a real elite squad, quite frankly. For a team that earlier in the season looked pretty good on both sides of the ball in multiple phases. And Wisconsin's really come to life, although they've beaten not very good football teams. Quarterback positions look pretty solid after a change there. They can run the ball. Defense is looking more respectable. They've won 3 straight over bad teams, Purdue, Rutgers, and Northwestern. But they're coming back home here after several weeks on the road. Penn State only favored by a touchdown here. Less than a touchdown at this point. This could be an interesting game over on NBC. LSU is ranked 8th. They're playing Texas A&M, who's ranked 14th. A night game at College Station. This is also at 7:30 on ABC. 2.5-point favorites at home are the Texas A&M Aggies. 54.5 points, right around the total expected for this ball game. Now, the Aggies at times, here's the problem. They still look like garbage sometimes. They played tightly against Mississippi State last week, 34-24, and that was coming off a week where they hammered Missouri at home. And the week previous to that, they were in a close one with Arkansas, and they were, of course, in a close one against Bowling Green as well. Now, last week they held Mississippi State to 5 of 16 on third down, 3 for 4 on fourth down, technically forcing multiple turnovers in preventing those fourth downs and doing a good job there. 9 for 14 converting on third down, and Wingman was back in the ball game. He had 2 turnovers, one touchdown pass, but it was really kind of mediocre. And the run game really wasn't there for them either. So they weren't terribly efficient, even in how they performed last week. Now, LSU, on the other hand, again, the defense has been questioned, but they've come around a bit. Harold Perkins has been out, yet, all you've heard about the defense is that they perform better when he's not in there. They've been able to change the scheme up a little bit. They hammered Arkansas last week. They, of course, beat Ole Miss in overtime 2 weeks ago, and they look like a pretty good ball club so far. They have a good quarterback in there. And Nussmeier, who's not exactly a Heisman candidate, but is certainly an efficient quarterback. He's no Joe Burrow, but he can certainly be efficient and get things done. And Caden Durham, was very efficient last week in rushing for over 100 yards and 3 touchdowns as well. And the defense, of course, can generate some pressure, even if they're giving up some points on the back end. But really, all around, this team seems to really be coming together here. So it's possible LSU just goes on the road here and really makes a mockery of Texas A&M. But it's a night game at home. This is going to be a very interesting ball game here. This may be the top watch. May have to bump down Penn State at Wisconsin to a channel flipper. Speaking of channel flippers, I did put Kansas State at 16th on the AP poll, hosting Kansas in the rivalry game here in this window, even though Kansas has really struggled this year. They're 2-5, right? So normally this game is kind of a check-in box score. This is the 8 o'clock on ESPN2. Kansas State favored by 10 at home. Hopefully Kansas is kind of figuring things out still here later in the season. They put 42 points on the board last week. They put 31 on Arizona State in a losing effort, 27 on TCU in a losing effort, 28 on West Virginia in a losing effort. The offense is still there. The defense hopefully is finding something to keep going there. I think they can hang with Kansas State there in Manhattan and keep things a little bit interesting, but that's certainly not a given. Duke has been the most uninteresting, already bowl eligible team in college football this season. They beat Florida State last week. Their only loss is at Georgia Tech. And SMU is coming to town at 8 o'clock on the ACC network. And the Mustangs are favored by double digits in this one. They've smashed Stanford, Florida State. They were in a shootout with TCU that they won. They won at Louisville by a touchdown. And it still looks like a very good ball club here, especially since they switched quarterbacks here from Preston Stone to Kevin Jennings, completing 66% of his passes. They're doing a pretty good job there with him on guarding the offense there. Rashad Smith is doing a good job at rushing for almost 7 yards per carry and has 7 touchdowns on the season. And the defense there has certainly picked up from where they've been in years past in giving up a lot of points on the back end of things. I haven't had an opportunity to watch them a whole lot this season, but they're certainly a much better ball club than years previous, and it's happened just in time for them to compete here for the ACC. Notable games include Louisiana Monroe, 5-1, 3-0 in the Sun Belt, playing at South Alabama at 5 o'clock on ESPN+. They are underdogs by a touchdown, and that one just haven't really been a great quarterback. A great season so far this year. And South Alabama's quarterback has been pretty good in Gio Lopez there. 13 touchdowns and 1 pick on the season. And he's been pretty good for South Alabama. You know the wins aren't necessarily coming for that team. They're looking all right for a Sun Belt squad there. I also have, Miami's playing Florida State. Is it really a rivalry game? It's at 7 o'clock. ESPN. The lights are on. Miami's ranked 6th. They're playing close games. The only big difference maker is Cam Ward. But Florida State continues to embarrass themselves, and they're 1-6. 3 touchdown favorites are the Miami Hurricanes. And then I don't know what to do with some of these Big 12 games. Houston's hosting Utah now, but Utah's 4-3. Houston's 2-5. Utah's still favored by 3.5 on the road, and they're not going to have a whole lot of offense. That's 7 o'clock on ESPN Plus. We do have West Virginia as well. They'll be heading to Arizona for a couple teams that are really struggling as well. That was not necessarily expected. That's 7 o'clock on FS1. Arizona favored by 3.5. So a couple of games there involving Big 12 teams. Michigan will be hosting Michigan State. A couple teams looking at 4-3. This is 7:30 on the Big Ten Network. Both 2-2 in conference play. Michigan's favored by 5 at home. Under 40 points is where we're sitting with the over-under at the moment. This game, I think, is a little bit better than some of the others on the slate here, besides some of the ones with numbers, teams with numbers next to their name. Michigan, of course, not having problems with offense. We don't really need to reiterate that. But they'll have some NFL players, obviously. They got guys on defense. Michigan State, I think, is on a bit of an upswing. Big wins over Iowa recently, and, has a winning record and can go to Ann Arbor and possibly get a win in this one, and has a chance to pick up some wins towards the back end of their schedule here as well. And there's not a whole lot of other games worth mentioning, really. Kentucky hosting Auburn on the SEC Network, kind of gross. Arkansas State and Troy, kind of gross. Colorado State, New Mexico, gross. California, Oregon State on ESPN2, gross. None of those sound too appetizing to me. Our late night slate has 3 games on it, and the main one's going to feature Colorado yet again, 10:15 ESPN, because where else would Colorado play? They're 5.5 favorites at home. They're still 3-1 in the Big 12, and we'll get to see our 2 stars here. Hopefully, even with his banged up shoulder, we'll get to see our favorite two-way player here in Mr. Hunter, and they're going to play a good Cincinnati team. They're 5-2, 3-1 in the Big 12 as well. So this is a big game for conference play as the Bearcats come in to play the Buffaloes. 2 wins straight for the Bearcats over Arizona State and Central Florida, and I'm excited to see them play a much better team here with quarterback Swornsby going up against this defense, hopefully getting to put up some numbers here. Finally, we have San Diego State hosting Washington State at 10:30 on the CBS Sports Network. Cougars favored by 14.5 in that one. And at midnight, we have our good old Hawaii Rainbow Warriors hosting Nevada, who's made it up to 3-5, haven't won a conference game yet. This is, I think this is like a pick'em game, if I'm not mistaken. But that one is the late into Sunday night game. So to fill out our categories here on the day for your TV guide for what are we on? Week 9, college football season? Man. Top watch. I do have LSU at Texas A&M if you're sitting down to watch one game. Not Missouri, Alabama. Not Texas, Vanderbilt. Not Notre Dame, Navy. I do have the LSU at Texas A&M game. Of course, you can flip over to Penn State, Wisconsin, presumably in that same time slot. Or check on BYU. Check on Miami in that same nighttime slot. Audible, that noon slate, if it gets kind of sloppy, Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, that's a nice battle there. You can flip over to that one. Underrated, I do have Michigan State, but I don't know. I mean, Indiana, Washington, I still have as a notable game, so I guess I'll stick with Washington State. Seems like there's just some really, really low rung games this week. But Michigan State, I suppose. Hail Mary. Wisconsin could beat Penn State. BYU could take a loss as well. It's surprising they're underdogs in that ball game. Small screen Starlet. Tulane at North Texas. Should have lots of points in that one. And again, lots of teams in the mix for the American, but these two are participants. And finally, your late night snack is that Cincinnati at Colorado game, the top game in the late night slate. So thank you very much for tuning in and helping you set up your Saturday. We'll talk NBA next time. Thank you.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings. I need my blessings every penny, daily counting every single one. I'm seeing plenty. Level up and watch that beat turn into